We belong dead.
At the end of the script for 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein, all the principal characters are killed. The stage directions reading, "The thunders of a jealous and triumphant Jehovah roll for positively the final fade out." Director James Whale drawing a very definite line under any possibility of a further film. And yet, days before the film's premiere, Whale recalled the actors to shoot a new ending in which Henry and Elizabeth Frankenstein survive.
Darling.
Did he decide a happy ending was better? Or was he leaving the door open to the possibility of a sequel? We'll never know, but over 5 more films, Universal's Frankenstein series would prove that there was no fade out so final that a sequel was impossible. The Frankenstein series divides conveniently into 3. The 2 Whale masterpieces to start, the 2 monster rallies to end, 3 if you include Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and in between them, 3 films in which the monster is played by each of Universal's top horror stars. Overall, it is a story of diminishing returns, particularly for the creature himself, his role reduced with each film, but it's also a story of imagination and wild ideas. Some of which made it to the screen, others didn't. Some of which worked, others not. It's the story of Universal Horror's mid-period, its triumphant resurrection,
He's alive!
and swift decline. By the time Bride of Frankenstein was in cinemas, things were looking bleak for Universal's founder Carl Laemmle and his son, who had championed the horror series and made some great films, but whose time in charge was characterised by financial failure. The axe fell in 1936, the studio passing into the hands of a syndicate, ushering in the era of new Universal. They cancelled the horror series and refocused priorities on the bottom line: cheap, profitable entertainment. A policy that lost $3 million in 2 years, precipitating another change at the top and ushering in the era of new Universal. Far from this corporate wrangling, the Regina Theatre in Los Angeles had started showing old horror movies, Frankenstein, Dracula, Son of Kong, and audiences were queuing around the block. Universal's new management was quick to capitalise, reissuing their horror classics countrywide to phenomenal box office. The next step was obvious. Whale had by now left Universal, and there's no evidence he was even approached to direct a further sequel. But that didn't mean that Universal was cutting corners. Son of Frankenstein would be the most expensive of the series, and director Roland V. Lee was a big hitter, best known for Swashbuckler, The Count of Monte Cristo.
I am Ali Pasha's daughter. The Count de Mondego betrayed him, betrayed France.
The script by Willis Cooper acknowledges the popularity of the earlier films in frequent references. The monster speaks, as he did in Bride of Frankenstein. And when Wolf Frankenstein explores the abandoned laboratory, he finds the skeletons not just of Dr. Pretorius, but of Pretorius's homunculi. This is a script written by someone who has clearly watched those earlier films, but maybe not someone who understood them. The creature kills without reason, and has suddenly developed a taste for world domination. The justification for the creature returning to life is weak, as is the ending, and one or more of these factors may have influenced Lee's decision to rewrite extensively. Normally, that would mean a new draft, but Lee was a man in a hurry. In fact, rewrite may not even be the right word. By all accounts, Lee made up the story as they went along, the actors getting new pages every day.
Here he planned a miracle. saw it come to pass.
How accurate that is hard to say because we are not talking about small changes. In the original script, the focus is on Wolf and Police Inspector Neumüller, played by Bela Lugosi. In the finished film, Lugosi is playing the creature's friend, Igor, who doesn't even appear in the Cooper script, yet who dominates the film.
This is place of the dead. We're all dead here.
A character who really doesn't dominate is the creature himself. Neither Lee nor star Boris Karloff wanted the creature to speak, something Karloff had objected to in Bride of Frankenstein, but that's not the only change from the script. Cooper had the creature accidentally struck by lightning early on, and his goal to rule the world is his own. In the finished film, Karloff appears 30 minutes in and doesn't get up for another 25. More importantly, he has no story of his own. He is the tool of Igor's vengeance. This is the first step in an eroding of the creature's role within his own series.
No!
Although the knee-jerk brutality of the Cooper script is thankfully gone, there are still only a handful of moments that recall the soulful creature of the earlier films. For these, we can probably thank Karloff, who wanted to remain true to the character he had created. His return to the role that made him famous is key to the film's success, and if that role is reduced, Karloff still makes the most of every moment. Given the circumstances of its making, Son of Frankenstein is an extraordinary film. Lee dispenses with Whale's gothic design, leaning into a more expressionist aesthetic, although I like to think this track through the wall is a nod to Whale. The story pays tribute to the earlier films and to original Frankenstein Colin Clive, but it's very much its own beast.
His name has become synonymous with horror and monsters.
Basil Rathbone's Wolf Frankenstein is his obsessive father's son, unable to resist the lure of scientific discovery.
My father drew that very lightning from heaven and forced it to his own will.
Though why the townsfolk treat him as a hero at the end is a mystery. Lionel Atwill keeps a straight face while making the most of Inspector Crow's false arm. Hard to watch after you've seen Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein.
It's a very real thing.
Which doesn't change that much. Josephine Hutchinson takes the traditionally thankless role of Frankenstein's wife.
You really feel that you belong here already?
Yes, I think I do.
And Universal's bit players show up for different roles in the same franchise. There's definitely a video to be made charting the appearances of these actors through Universal Horror. And Donnie Dunagan is the most annoying child in the series.
Well, hello!
Slick and stylish, but still with thought-provoking moments, Son of Frankenstein proved a benchmark for this new era of Universal Horror, as the original had 8 years earlier. For me, it can't compete with the Whale films, but it's still an enjoyable one, largely thanks to Bela Lugosi. According to Lugosi's widow, the actor's salary was cut from $1,000 a week to $500, and the plan was to shoot all of his scenes in 1 week. Lugosi had hardly worked during the horror downturn of the mid-30s, and Universal knew that he could not afford to turn down work at any price. But Roland Lee was incensed by this and determined to keep Lugosi on set every day. Igor seems to watch over every scene, or just stands there, costing Universal money. The grateful Lugosi responded with one of his greatest performances.
Nobody can mend Igor's neck. It's all right.
Igor is a creation of gleeful malevolence, stealing every scene and commanding the story.
8 men say Igor hanged. Now 8 men dead.
It is ironic that Lugosi's best role comes from Universal trying to screw him. Lugosi even made peace with makeup genius Jack Pierce, happy to go through the lengthy transformation for this character.
No.
This is also one of the best collaborations between Karloff and Lugosi, Igor's death giving the film its most poignant moment. The one time we clearly see the creature of the earlier films. Karloff became a father for the first time during the shoot, as Lugosi had 10 months earlier, giving the two men something to bond over. It was a very happy shoot, despite what must have been chaos. Which continued right to the end. With a deadline to hit, editing and scoring was furiously executed in a matter of days, the film premiering less than 70 hours after filming wrapped. Reviews and audiences were enthusiastic, proving there was still public appetite for horror and guaranteeing a future for Universal's monsters. But the chaotic production had driven up the budget to such an extent that the film probably just covered its costs. Universal would be more cagey in the future, and for more reasons than one. It's quite possible Son of Frankenstein would never have gone ahead if Karloff had not signed up, so identified with the creature was he. But now, he was done. Not because he felt too old, but because, in his words, "I owe him so much, I owe him a little respect, a little rest." Words that now seem prophetic. Given the gap between Son of Frankenstein and its sequel, it's likely there was some question of whether there could even be a Frankenstein film without Karloff, and even once the decision was made, Universal's caution can be measured financially. Ghost of Frankenstein would be the cheapest of the entire series, but who would play the creature? Lon Chaney Jr. had just given a terrific performance in The Wolfman, solidifying his credentials as the heir to Karloff's horror crown. As with Son of Frankenstein, there would be major differences between the initial script by Eric Taylor and the finished film, directed by Earl C. Kenton, a man with a fascinating CV from Keystone Cop to directing pre-code classic Island of Lost Souls. But Kenton would take a less seat-of-the-pants approach, getting W. Scott Darling to rewrite the script before filming began. Taylor had included Wolf Frankenstein, perhaps thinking Basil Rathbone might return. This was changed to Wolf's younger brother, Ludwig.
Ever since the day my father put life into that creature, it has been a curse.
Played by British theatrical legend Sir Cedric Hardwicke, who was actually younger than Basil Rathbone. I suspect this change is down to casting availability, and you can see how it would have gone with Wolf.
How does it feel to face a man you thought your brother killed, Doctor?
The blackmail plot would make more sense.
You wouldn't want me to tell them that you, the son of the Frankenstein, had created him?
As would the creature recognizing Frankenstein. A more positive result of the change, Taylor had killed off Wolf's wife Elsa, who apparently committed suicide after the trauma she suffered.
Goodbye.
She seemed fine. Hardwicke also played the ghost of the title.
Would you destroy that which I, your father, dedicated his life to creating?
Your father was Frankenstein, and your mother was the lightning.
One essential element was the return of Bela Lugosi's Igor, even if the credits don't reflect his importance. Explanations for his survival are kept sensibly light.
But Igor does not die that easily.
More jarring is Igor's change in appearance, as he has apparently cleaned up and had his teeth fixed. Presumably an issue of time and budget. Lugosi is as good as before, losing himself in the role so completely that co-star Evelyn Ankers apparently didn't realise who was playing Igor until filming was completed. even though they had worked together before.
Destroy the castle!
The film opens with the locals gunning for Igor. The castle was built, as were most models throughout the series, by one of the great unsung heroes of Universal horror, Charles Baker. His name never appears in the credits, but his contribution is massive. Following his fiery end in the previous film, the creature is discovered beneath the castle, encased in sulphur. The scene was a nightmare for Chaney, who had to be painstakingly covered layer by layer. It took 7 hours, and the claustrophobic Chaney apparently suffered a blackout.
My friend.
Much of the cast had been in The Wolfman, which had wrapped only 3 weeks earlier, including heroine Evelyn Ankers, here playing Elsa Frankenstein, perhaps named after her late aunt. Ankers would become Universal's most prolific female horror star, often cast alongside Chaney. The pair did not get along, which, along with an antipathy between Lugosi and Chaney, might have made for an awkward shoot. But some of the ill feeling may have been dispelled by the presence of Janet Ann Gallo, playing Cloastine.
Are you a giant?
Chaney, Lugosi and Ankers all adored Gallo, and her presence may have helped keep the peace, as well as keeping Chaney sober. Another fractious relationship was that between Chaney and makeup man Jack Pierce. When asked if he enjoyed working with Lon Chaney Jr., Pierce later said, "Yes and no, that's all I can say." It didn't help that Pierce was always putting Chaney through tortuous makeups, this one particularly horrifying, as Chaney proved allergic to the sponge rubber headpiece, causing his skin to blister. When Pierce refused to remove it, Chaney ripped it off, taking part of his forehead with it. The Ghost of Frankenstein was shot as an A picture, with strong production values and a fine score from Hans Salter, who would say later in life that Igor's horn still haunted him. But it had the budget and runtime of a B-movie, and this is very much a transitional film within the series. It opens ambitiously and effectively, but soon resorts to a by-the-numbers plot.
We will go to Ludwig, the second son of Frankenstein.
Historian Gregory Mank has pointed out that it is kind of a horror version of Mice and Men. In Visceria, Igor and the creature meet Hardwick's Frankenstein and his colleague Bomer, played by another returning actor.
In those days, I was the master. Frankenstein was just the pupil.
Lionel Atwill would appear in all 5 of the later Frankensteins, playing a different role in each.
Go to your homes, all of you.
Atwill said, "I'm the most complete sadist, tiger man, sensualist you can imagine. In my picture roles, of course." A knowing quote from a man facing charges for showing pornographic films at his home orgies.
We'll be together always. My brain and his body.
As the film progresses, it moves more into B-movie territory.
We would rule the state and even the whole country.
In Taylor's script, Igor's plans go farther as he amasses an army of the crippled and deformed. Too expensive and sounds a little ridiculous, but true to the spirit of a series that was always about society's outcasts, those who are different. This is the last of the series that does any real justice to the creature, and Chaney is an imposing presence, but remember the creature's reaction when Igor died. Here he is, learning that his only friend is still alive.
My friend.
Potentially he's shell-shocked after his ordeal, but this lack of emotion continues. Here's Karloff's creature meeting Maria in the first film.
Will you play with me?
And here's Chaney's meeting Cloastine.
Hello.
It's easy to blame Chaney, but this has to be at least partly a directorial decision, especially when the script describes the creature as nearly hysterical with joy. For whatever reason, Kenton and/or Chaney decided the creature should remain emotionless. Another step in the erosion of his character. Though box office dropped off more quickly than previous films, Ghost of Frankenstein's low budget made for solid profits, and with Chaney proving popular, Universal was happy to star him in a further film, though not as originally planned. Screenwriter Kurt Siodmak claimed that the title, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, was the result of a joke he made in the Universal commissary that he was then assigned to write. True or not, the title signalled the way forward for Universal's monsters, bringing them together. It also created a casting issue. Chaney had been established as the new creature, but the Wolfman was, in his own words, my baby. The idea of Chaney playing both roles using split screens and doubles survived almost up to filming before it was abandoned in favour of a solution suggested by the previous film.
I, Igor, will live forever!
At the end of The Ghost of Frankenstein, Igor's brain is put into the creature's body, with an unfortunate side effect.
I can't see!
Please note, Chaney was clearly capable of more emotive acting, reinforcing the idea that Kenton was responsible for the blank creature. What goes sadly unnoted here is that the abnormal brain that defined Karloff's elemental and sympathetic creature is now just so much medical waste. That creature is dead, with no ceremony to mark his passing. But if it was now Igor's brain and voice, why couldn't it be Lugosi's body? It's a well-trodden story. We've told it at least 3 times. How money worries forced Lugosi to take the role he had either missed out on or turned down in 1931, depending on who you listen to. How his delivery of Siodmak's florid dialogue, which reads neither like Igor nor the creature, made executives laugh, and so he was muted in the finished film. How all references to the creature's blindness were cut, making Lugosi's performance a parody and inadvertently giving rise to the cliché of the arms outstretched monster, and garnering mocking reviews for the beleaguered actor from critics who had no idea of the full story. For Lon Chaney Jr. and the Wolfman, this was an effective sequel, and we cover his side of things more in our Wolfman special. But for Lugosi and the creature, it was a disaster. Made all the worse for the effort Lugosi put in, rising at 2 a.m. to prepare for a 15-hour day in heavy makeup and costume. Small wonder the 60-year-old actor passed out on set and had to rely on stuntmen Eddie Parker and Gil Perkins. The creature's plotline faded with Lugosi's dialogue, and Siodmak's central conceit, one monster wants to die, the other to live forever, is largely lost. The film led directly to the creature's demotion from star to passenger in his own series. While the much-anticipated face-off between the two monsters fails to live up to billing. What remains is a sporadically entertaining B-movie directed by Roy William Neill, best known for the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films. There's an unexpected musical break, courtesy of Hans Salter and singer Adia Kuznetsov. Lionel Atwill returns against the mandate of the Hayes office as he was awaiting verdict on his court case. Maria Uspenskaya brilliantly reprises her role from the Wolfman.
But I will guard you and take care of you as I took care of my own son.
And Ilona Massey takes over from Evelyn Ankers as Elsa Frankenstein, the last of that family to appear in the series.
My father was a great scientist, but all he created brought unhappiness.
And the only one with an accent.
Who could have done this terrible thing?
Could it be the monster again? Frankenstein's monster?
Also making his last appearance in the series was Dwight Frye. Fritz in the original film, he had been in every Frankenstein since. This, his largest role since The Bride. He would die later that year, aged 44, just 3 days before he was due to start work on Wilson, a film he hoped would end his horror typecasting.
Much as I'd like to kill the monster, I'd hate to crawl around through those dark catacombs of Frankenstein's castle in the black of the night.
As well as charting Universal Horror's decline to B-movies, these 3 films reflect their central actors. Karloff gets a glorious send-off in the big money film, Chaney is forever the second man, and Lugosi gets the rotten end of everything. But they were stars. To this point, Universal still felt the creature warranted a name behind the makeup. That was about to change. Glenn Strange had got his start in movies after competing in a rodeo organised by big screen cowboy Hoot Gibson. Having grown up on a ranch, he had no problem getting bit parts in westerns, and in 1944 reported to Jack Pierce to get a scar for his latest. Pierce instantly called producer Paul Mulvern to say that he had found their new creature. Strange was no star, but he looked the part. He would require no padding, no stunt double, no high salary, and no billing on the poster. The last time an unknown had played the creature had been in 1931, and it had made Karloff's career. But that was for a very different film. The 2 house films that wind up Universal's cycle are also known as the Monster Rally films. This is where Universal's monsters assemble. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, alongside various hunchbacks and mad scientists. The Mummy was supposed to appear too, but it was decided that would be overkill. Both directed by Earl C. Kenton, they do involve a certain amount of barrel scraping, but are filled with memorable moments and characters. House of Frankenstein, previously called The Devil's Brood, features Karloff's return to the series on magnetic form as Frankenstein wannabe Dr. Niemann.
If I had Frankenstein's records to guide me, I could give you a perfect body.
It also features John Carradine's first turn as Dracula, J. Carrol Naish, superb as the hunchback Daniel, Anne Gwynn, Universal's TNT girl, that's trim, neat, terrific, and Elena Verdugo as Gypsy Ilonka, surely the most interesting heroine in the series because she is flawed. A suitable love interest for Chaney's doomed Larry Talbot. Though of course he would return for House of Dracula, the script based on the aborted Dracula Meets the Wolfman. Here, the title character gets his best scene since the Lugosi original.
It breathes the spirit of the night. They played it the evening we met at the concert.
I'd forgotten until I saw you again.
The series gets its first female hunchback, played by Jane Addams, who was delighted to be playing something other than a pretty girl. And Lionel Atwill plays yet another police inspector in one of his last films. The doomed Dr. Edelman attempts to cure the monsters, giving Larry Talbot the ending he deserves. A moving performance by Lon Chaney Jr. They are fun films. But Frankenstein films? In House of Frankenstein, the creature is thawed out by Dr. Niemann,
The triumphant climax of Frankenstein's genius.
alongside his last sparring partner.
He wanted life and strength. I wanted only death.
But spends much of the film inert until coming to violent life at the end. That scream is Karloff's from Son of Frankenstein. underlining the deterioration of the creature's character. Despite being unwell, Karloff coached Strange, and there is something fitting about the creature carrying him to his last moments in the series, sharing his fate. Until House of Dracula, when he is discovered under Dr. Edelman's house.
Still alive. He's indestructible.
The creature's immortality, a feature since Son of Frankenstein, is first mentioned by Dr. Pretorius in lines cut from Bride of Frankenstein, so it does have precedent of some sort.
The spark of life is still there, waiting to be revived.
But the creature was never merely terrifying in his appearance. The horror came equally from what he was, and the Promethean hubris that had created him, making the dead live again, which by now is just taken for granted.
That's it.
The original story had the creature fight Larry Talbot, but in the event, Strange was denied even that. The creature's final on-screen moments are reused from The Ghost of Frankenstein. Strange's creature and the other monsters would return to battle Abbott and Costello a few years later, but their horror career was over.
Frankenstein's monster must never wreak havoc again.
In his introduction to Philip J. Riley's book on House of Dracula, John Carradine sent the studio's current owners a message saying, "You do not just own the ground where your new tours are flourishing, you also own the mineral rights, and there is gold right under your feet." Universal have so far proved inadequate miners, but perhaps the studio never really understood what they had. Carl Laemmle Jr. had to fight for his horror series, and it was cancelled as soon as he was out the door. When popularity demanded its resurrection, it was only a few films before penny pinching and corner cutting made its failure a self-fulfilling prophecy. These will forever be the Universal horror films, but Universal undermined and disowned them every chance it got. We should more properly remember them as belonging to the creative men and women who made them. From directors like Whale and Lee, and stars like Karloff, Chaney and Lugosi, to the unsung heroes like model man Charlie Baker or Ellis Berman, who made all of Universal's rubber prosthetics, or contract players like Lionel Belmore and Michael Mark.
Goodbye. Be a good girl now.
To them, and 100 others like them, we owe the existence of these films, and this video is dedicated to them. Thanks for watching, and as always, special thanks to our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters who make these longer videos possible. We really could not make these without you. Please share your memories and feelings on the Universal Frankenstein series in the comments below, along with any other unsung heroes you'd like to name check. And if you're feeling generous, why not pick up a copy of my new book, The Legacy of Frankenstein.